One of the most important individuals, who would be instrumental in maintaining the vast power of the Corleone family empire, was the legendary consigliere, Tom Hagen. He was made consigliere to the most powerful mafia boss in the entire country. Even though the films didn't focus primarily on him, Tom was still an integral part of the Corleone family and played a key role in its success. He helped the empire grow to be worth billions, and held the secrets of the Corleone family as he was the Don's right-hand man, and was entrusted with almost everything. So in this video we will finally analyze and uncover everything you want to know about the legendary consigliere, Tom Hagen. Tom Hagen is probably known as the most underrated character in the entire trilogy, and so if you watch this video you will definitely understand how and why he is such a critical character in the films. In this video we continue what we covered in the previous video as well as much more. In one of the initial scripts of The Godfather 3, Michael Corleone and Tom Hagen would go up against each other. Which begs the question, if Tom was to go up against Michael, who would win? Let's find out. In addition, we will explore one of the most common questions we all have wondered for years, and now we finally can answer it. So we have a lot to get through, so let's just get started.
It's because I admire you, and I love you, that I kept things secret from you.
After the attempt on Michael's life at the compound, Michael appointed Tom as acting Don.
You're gonna be the Don.
Which came out quite a surprise to Tom, as this was a sign of deep trust. And so, Tom finally understood why Michael was distancing him from certain aspects of the family business. Michael explained that he had to exclude Tom from these aspects, so that he can with full certainty trust him at that point. This is because of the fact that since Tom didn't know certain things, he wouldn't be targeted or pressured to betray Michael, especially since how high up Tom was, he would be the person Michael's enemies would target to get to him. But with Tom not having any motive or information to make moves against him, Michael knew he could count on at least one person.
That's why at this moment you're the only one I can completely trust.
Hagen was instrumental in both securing the friendship of powerful Senator Patrick Geary and defending Michael as his lawyer during the Senate hearings on the Mafia. After Michael had taken care of all his enemies once again, there was still one last thread he needed taken care of by Tom. And so he was instructed by Michael to convince the almost traitor, Frank Pentangeli, to, let's just say, permanently stay silent once and for all, to protect Michael and the family from his testimony forever. With Pentangeli and other enemies dead, the Corleone family as it regained its position as the most powerful crime family in the nation, and now on its way into fulfilling Michael's longtime vision. Something that many of us have wondered, and maybe some haven't even thought of, was if Tom Hagen and Michael Corleone were to go head-to-head, who would win? Who would be the better Don? What's interesting is that this was going to be the initial storyline of The Godfather 3. But in this scenario, we will have Michael and Tom go against each other, right after where we left off in the end of part 2. This was when Michael had taken out Hyman Roth, Frank Pentangeli, and even Fredo. We all know Don Michael Corleone, the youngest son of the notorious Don Vito Corleone. He had inherited most of Vito's attributes, which enough to say that Michael was extremely capable of, and even proves himself as capable of surviving anything that is thrown at him. Michael really was the most powerful crime boss in the country, and probably the most powerful the Mafia had ever seen. Tom Hagen was one of the most important figures in the criminal underworld. Tom for years was the right-hand man of the most powerful Mafia boss that until that point the criminal world had ever seen, namely Don Vito Corleone.
You were around the old-timers who dreamed of how the family should be organized, how they based them on the old Roman legions and called them regimes, the capos and the soldiers.
Tom had witnessed the forming of the commission and the formation of the Mafia.
And we was like the Roman Empire. The Corleone family was like the Roman Empire.
In terms of going up against Michael, he definitely has the highest chance of success. Tom is essentially a Corleone and knows how to think like one.
Forget about it.
He also knows all of Michael's secrets, let alone all the Corleone family's hidden assets and critical information. He also has direct access to the Corleone soldiers, as the consigliere doesn't have a buffer between them and the soldiers, so everyone has to go through him. So to really understand and predict what the outcome will be, we have to analyze both Tom and Michael individually in the following key categories. An essential factor that we should examine is their overall intelligence. It's safe to say both Michael and Tom were probably the most intelligent characters in the whole trilogy, excluding Vito, of course. Michael inherited Vito's intelligence, vision, as well as ability to read people that would serve him during his rise to the top.
Only don't tell me you're innocent, because it insults my intelligence. It makes me very angry.
Tom also gained a lot of knowledge and learned firsthand from Vito Corleone. So with that being said, we'll make it a draw as it's too close to call a clear winner. From what we've seen, it's very obvious that Michael clearly would win in this category. We all witnessed Michael willing to go to extreme lengths to get what he wants. On the other hand, even though Tom wasn't exactly as ruthless as Michael or even Sonny, he was still able to conjure up schemes that weren't so peaceful. But if they were to go head to head, it's very clear Michael would surpass Tom in terms of sheer viciousness and brutality. Tom, it seems, wouldn't have been as willing to take an aggressive approach similar to the extent Michael would go, and it makes sense since he was never the guy to straighten anyone out. Tom was always seen as the legal man, even though it isn't always necessarily true. He wasn't really the guy that organized hits or anything similar. So most don't see him as such a threat. So to put Tom up against Michael in this category, it's clear Tom wouldn't stand a chance. This is without a doubt the biggest difference between Michael and Tom, and perhaps Michael's biggest advantage. Michael's rise to power wasn't exactly peaceful. It's clear from even his first step into the mafia that Michael was not to be trifled with. Anyone who did or even underestimated him would suffer gravely. He made a name for himself as an even more ruthless Don than his father or even his reckless brother Sonny. Michael used this factor to maintain power, as he wasn't as respected or influential as Vito, to use to establish control over the empire. In addition to the fact that he was willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure he always would come out on top, Michael was definitely more feared than Tom, which makes sense since Tom was for the most part the family's lawyer. However, it could be advantageous for Tom, as fear can only go so far, and with his ability to negotiate, Tom could leverage this to his favor. However, in most cases the fear that the criminal underworld has for Michael would prove to be one of Michael's most important assets. Therefore, Michael without a shadow of a doubt would win in this category. From what we've seen, it seems that Michael really had to work for quite a while to earn the total respect of the criminal underworld. He was more feared than loved. On the other hand, Tom was not feared, but he was respected by the other families to an extent, but especially within the Corleone family itself. We saw how Tom is always the man to go to when in need of something, as he was more reasonable than Michael. In addition, even though he was German-Irish, he was acknowledged as having played a crucial role in establishing the Corleone family. Even though Michael worked hard to get the family where it was, most didn't respect him as they should have. They viewed him as someone who had just inherited the empire without earning it. But Tom was always respected as someone who somehow managed to become the consigliere to the most powerful man the mafia had ever seen, and yet he wasn't even Sicilian, which at the time was seen as extraordinary. This might be debatable, but we'll give this one to Tom. This is really Tom's biggest area of expertise. Tom was always the deal maker. His entire life in the mafia he was either negotiating with everyone from mob dons to senators and whoever else you can imagine. Or he was watching some of the best who ever do it, learning from them and gaining first-hand experience. This doesn't mean Michael was not diplomatic or couldn't negotiate effectively. Rather, Tom was just far superior in this category. And even Don Vito knew Tom was capable enough to represent him and speak for him, so that's really the biggest stamp of approval. And what is even more important, Tom has a better relationship with the other mobsters of all levels due to his years of experience in dealing with them. A perfect example of this was shown in the relationship Tom had with someone like Frankie Five Angels. While Michael had a sort of disconnect with the streets, as he didn't want to deal too much with them as he aspired to go completely legitimate, Tom had the best of both worlds. He understood and thrived in both the courtrooms and on the streets, which allowed him to relate to both types of people. This might seem quite a surprise, but it's true, Tom was a better deal maker than Michael. Which is why we have to give it to Tom. Michael always had the capacity to go to lengths very few would even think of. He came up with the daring plan to take out both Sollozzo and Police Captain McCluskey. A plan that even the thought of wasn't even taken seriously by Sonny or Tom or any of the other high-ranking members of the Corleone family. So if a plan that even Sonny thought was crazy, that should be enough to show how cunning Michael was. And that was just one example. We also have the baptism of fire. Then we have in part 2 when he takes out all his enemies once again. Even though they possessed fairly similar traits, except Michael possessing more cunning and willingness to go to extreme lengths, and Tom possessing a lot more experience, better relationships in the mafia, not to mention a greater ability to negotiate and reach agreements with others. But even with both growing up together and learning from Don Vito, both would take a different approach. It would be likely that Tom would use his deep connections and long-lasting relationships with the other mafia families across the United States, all the way to Sicily, and have them side with him against Michael. However, as we mentioned, Michael possessed something that Tom didn't have, which was his extraordinary level of strategic prowess, combined with his cunning, which could allow him to surpass anything that Tom could throw at him, as he's been in similar situations before. Michael also faced adversaries who were far more powerful and in better positions than Tom would be in, and even they couldn't stand a chance. But what those individuals did not possess, and could be a deciding factor, was the fact Tom really was a Corleone. Tom really was basically one of Vito's sons, and therefore could think like a Corleone. And with the years of experience in working with Michael and understanding his thought process, makes it a decisive factor to consider. But what's certain is that it will definitely be the biggest challenge either one of them would face, and it would not be as easy or fast to deal with as any of their previous enemies. Who do you think is the winner? Comment below. With all these factors considered and analyzed, in a scenario where Michael Corleone and Tom Hagen were to go against each other, we believe the winner would be Michael Corleone. This is primarily due to the simple fact that Tom was not a war general, or wasn't really a gangster. He was a great consigliere in peacetime. He knows how to maintain and run an empire, but he eventually wouldn't be able to handle what Michael will throw at him. But with that being said, Tom would most definitely be the biggest challenge Michael could ever face. But those are just our thoughts. Very curious to know who you think would come out on top. One of the biggest questions that isn't really addressed in the films was exactly how did Tom die? In the films it isn't really addressed, but it seems it was from natural causes. However, in Dean Reisner's draft of The Godfather Part 3, Hagen was in his car along with his driver Fritz and Michael's son Anthony. They were escorted by various button men under Rocco, when suddenly, a shotgunner gets out from a nearby car. The first hit takes out the driver, which then forces the car to go out of control. The second hit takes out Hagen instantly. The shotgunner then disappears, and when the car crashes nearby, Rocco and several button men jump out of their cars and rush to the crash site. Tony was the only survivor of this ambush. However, the primary reason Tom was killed off was the fact actor Robert Duvall had disagreements and had objected to the salary offered to him, as it wasn't as high as the salaries offered to other actors such as Al Pacino and Diane Keaton. Therefore, he turned the role down and was written out of the script. Thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe to be able to watch our latest videos. We've had some delays, but next week we will be uploading our biggest and most anticipated video ever. It's literally been planned for months, and now to celebrate surpassing 50,000 Culture Mafia subscribers, we will finally release this special video.